I'm Claire Hammond. I'm 34 years old, and last night at my younger brother's engagement dinner, his fiancée looked straight at me and said, "Wait, you're the founder of Medivault." I watched my parents freeze in place as she nearly dropped her wine glass. The room went quiet. My brother looked like he'd forgotten how to blink. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to hold your head high while others overlooked you. I grew up in Westbrook, a small tree-lined suburb about an hour outside of Philadelphia. The kind of place where lawns are always neat, and everyone knows where you went to college by the time you're 12. My dad, Charles Hammond, was a cardiac surgeon, the one other surgeons called when things got complicated. My mother, Judith, was a corporate litigator who never left a courtroom without a win. And then there was Ethan, 4 years younger, but somehow always the one who carried the family torch. Our home looked perfect inside and out. Mahogany shelves framed diplomas, a kitchen island larger than most Manhattan apartments. But the air at that dinner table, it was all about what you'd accomplished since breakfast. Every evening started the same way. "So what did everyone do today?" Mom would ask, unfolding her cloth napkin. Ethan always had something ready, top-grade student government volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. When my turn came, it didn't matter what I said. It never sounded right in that room. I remember being 15 and thrilled to show them the website I built over a long weekend. I'd taught myself HTML and CSS, stayed up way too late doing it. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see that spark. Mom glanced at the screen and said, "That's nice, honey. But don't forget you've got Model UN regionals next week. Colleges like commitment, not distractions." Dad didn't even look up from his glass of wine. He just turned to Ethan and asked about his anatomy lab. By then I knew what the rules were. Doctors, lawyers, judges, that's what counted. Computer stuff. That was for tech support. So I built in silence. My bedroom became my workspace walls covered in diagrams and bits of code instead of swim team ribbons. While Ethan collected medals and framed letters of recommendation, I was learning how to write programs, debug them, break them, build them again. When I was 16, I created a software tool that helped our school plan its annual charity auction, the kind of event that usually required endless paper trails and headaches. My software cut planning time in half. The teacher who ran the event pulled my parents aside and said, "Claire's got real talent. She's not just playing around." Mom smiled politely and replied, "Yes, Claire has lots of interests, but we're keeping her on track for a strong pre-law curriculum." I had never once said I wanted to study law. The first time I thought I might be good at this really good was junior year. I entered a statewide coding challenge and made it to the finals with a logistics app I built from scratch. But the competition fell on the same Saturday as Ethan's white coat ceremony. When I told them, Mom said, "Oh, honey, your brother's day is more important. You understand, right? I went alone. The only finalist there without family. And I won. I remember holding that trophy on the ride home, my fingers tight around the edges. I walked into a house full of relatives, everyone laughing and raising glasses to Ethan. Dad gave me a half smile and said, "Oh, that's nice," before going back to his toast. That night, I sat in my room with that trophy on my lap and made a promise to myself. I wouldn't wait around for their applause. I'd build something so big, so undeniable, that one day they'd have no choice but to see it. I didn't know it yet, but that promise would carry me further than I ever imagined. And one day, it would take me right back to that family table, just not in the way they ever expected. Ethan got his acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins in early spring. The whole family celebrated that night, a full dinner spread candles, even the good china. Mom had picked up a bottle of champagne, and Dad made a toast about legacy and excellence. I remember standing off to the side in the kitchen washing dishes. No one asked me to handle listening to their laughter drift in from the dining room. The next morning, I found out the state finals for that coding competition I'd entered would fall on the same Saturday as Ethan's send-off party. When I told Mom, she frowned. "Oh, Claire, sweetheart, surely you can reschedule that." "It's a final round," I said. "It's not really something I can move." "Well, your brother's worked his whole life for this," she replied, as if I hadn't worked for anything at all. You understand, right? I did understand. I understood exactly where I stood. I went anyway. I wore a dress shirt and borrowed heels and carried my laptop in a messenger bag. The auditorium was packed with students, some in suits, others in t-shirts and hoodies. No one asked me why I was alone. I coded through the nerves, through the quiet hum of pressure in the air, through the part of me that still wanted someone in the audience. By the end of the afternoon, I was holding a first-place plaque with my name printed in gold. The judges' engineers from local tech firms shook my hand and told me I had something special. I thanked them, packed up my gear, and drove home just as the sun started dipping behind the trees. When I walked into the house, the smell of barbecue and laughter hit me all at once. Dad was out back with a crowd of family friends flipping burgers on the grill. Mom was arranging cupcakes on a platter. Ethan stood by the fireplace in his new white coat, surrounded by uncles and neighbors. No one noticed the plaque in my hand. Claire, Mom, called, catching sight of me. "There you are! Can you help set out the drinks?" I set the plaque down on the kitchen counter. It stayed there all night, untouched. Later, Dad gave a second toast. I stood near the hallway, listening. To Ethan, he said, "Who continues to make us proud, who reminds us of what discipline and ambition can achieve." The next morning, I slid that plaque into the top drawer of my desk. I didn't bring it up again. Senior year came fast. Everyone around me seemed focused on Ivy League applications and legacy admissions. At dinner, Mom dropped pamphlets for Penn and Columbia next to my plate. "Pre-law is still an option," she said. "You're so articulate, Claire. You'd do well in that field." But I'd already sent in my applications, state schools mostly. A couple of private ones with strong computer science departments, no Ivies, no law schools. When the envelope came from New Jersey Institute of Technology, I opened it alone in my room. Full scholarship, honors program. I read it twice before I brought it downstairs. Mom scanned the letter and set it on the table. "This is surprising," she said carefully. "But I thought we were looking at schools with more name recognition." Dad was more direct. "Claire, with your test scores, you could have aimed higher. This is practical, but it's not ambitious. It's where I want to go," I said. They didn't argue. They didn't celebrate either. That fall, I packed my bags and took a train north. It was the first time in my life I felt like I could breathe. At school, no one cared who my parents were. No one asked if my brother had gone to med school. People only wanted to know what I could do. I found my rhythm quickly: late nights in the lab, coffee-fueled study sessions. Friends who didn't think it was strange that I talked about back-end frameworks over lunch. Sophomore year, I met Lena during an advanced algorithms class. She was sharp and fast-talking, and we both aced the midterm without studying together. After class one day, she asked if I wanted to team up for the final project. We started building something that afternoon and never really stopped. She told me about her mom, a nurse who'd bounced from hospital to hospital after a misdiagnosis nearly cost her life. "The problem isn't the medicine," Lena said one night, scrolling through a database of treatment delays. "It's the system. Doctors don't talk to each other. Hospitals don't share records. It's chaos." She was right, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, between classes and cafe hangouts, we sketched out the early bones of a platform, something that could streamline medical communication, store patient history in real time, make doctors and patients part of the same conversation. We didn't have a name for it yet, but it was the first time in years I felt like I was building something that could actually change something. That summer, I went home for break. Nothing had changed. Dad still asked Ethan about patient rounds at the dinner table. Mom still called my programming that tech stuff. When relatives came by, the first thing they asked me was whether I was still playing around with computers. I gave short answers, just enough to keep things moving. Meanwhile, Lena and I were working from her parents' garage in Hoboken, coding on folding tables between stacks of holiday decorations. Her dad brought us sandwiches and asked real questions about what we were building. The difference between our two homes couldn't have been clearer. By junior year, we had a working prototype. We called it MetaVault. We pitched it at a student entrepreneurship showcase and walked away with enough prize money to file our first provisional patent. One of the professors introduced us to a hospital administrator in Newark who took one look at our demo and asked, "How soon can we try this?" I went home that Thanksgiving with more confidence than I'd ever felt. I'd done something. Built something. After dessert, Dad pulled me aside by the coffee pot. "Claire," he said, "your mother and I have been talking. We're a little concerned about your long-term prospects." I said nothing. "Ethan mentioned you've been working on some kind of app. That's fine, of course, but it might be wise to take a job with more, structure. Maybe at the hospital. They always need people in administration." I told him as calmly as I could that I was starting a business. He laughed. "Not in a cruel way, just in disbelief. A business, Claire. You've barely graduated." That was the last time I tried to tell them about my work. When Lena and I got our first real contract, we didn't celebrate with champagne. We bought a secondhand coffee maker and stayed up until dawn pushing code. Back home, when people asked what I was doing, I said I was still figuring things out. No one questioned it, and I didn't correct them. By the time I graduated, MetaVault had a small but loyal user base and a growing reputation. We had a desk at a shared office downtown and a developer who believed in the product so much he worked for equity. But at family dinners, I still sat at the far end of the table answering questions about next steps and whether I'd considered grad school. They never asked what I'd already built, not once. But I knew, and Lena knew. And we weren't done yet. By the time Lena and I signed our second hospital contract, we were working out of a shared apartment near Jersey City. The space was small, barely room for 2 desks in the living room, but it had light and quiet, and we could afford it. We split rent, coded in shifts, and lived mostly on black coffee and peanut butter crackers. The fridge was nearly empty some weeks, but our whiteboard was full of progress. We kept our heads down and kept building. In the mornings, I picked up small contract gigs, rebuilding websites, fixing security bugs, just enough to cover my student loans and our bills. In the afternoons, we focused on MetaVault. Lena took on the front-end design, I handled infrastructure, and at night we ran demo calls for hospital boards and IT managers who wanted to see the product in action. We weren't flashy. We didn't talk about scale or exit strategy. We just wanted to make something that worked better than the mess that was already out there. One evening about 6 months in, we landed a pilot program with a network of outpatient clinics outside of Trenton. Their director called us after seeing a demo through a colleague. He said, "We've had 3 patient record mix-ups this month alone. If your software can fix that, we're listening." We signed the contract the next week. That's when we hired our first developer, a quiet guy named Tyler, who'd interned at a health tech firm, but left after they shelved his redesign without testing it. He worked from a folding table in our apartment, headphones always on writing clean code, without needing much direction. It wasn't glamorous, but it was working. Back home, I kept things vague. When Mom called, I said work was steady. When Dad asked, I said I was doing a little consulting. That usually satisfied them. I knew what they pictured, something temporary, maybe entry-level, maybe a desk job in an open office somewhere. No one asked for details. At Christmas that year, Ethan and his girlfriend Dana announced their engagement during dessert. The dining room filled with applause hugs and champagne flutes clinking. My parents couldn't stop smiling. Later, as I was loading pie plates into the dishwasher, Mom stepped into the kitchen behind me. "You know," she said, refilling her glass, Ethan's friend Adam is finishing his residency. He's single, tall, very bright. Maybe you two could talk sometime, I nodded, not saying much. She gave a little shrug. Just think about it. You have time to figure things out, Claire. But there's nothing wrong with marrying someone solid, reliable. A good partner can help you get on track. I finished stacking the dishes. She went back to the dining room. That winter, Medivault's user base tripled. The clinic sent us monthly feedback, fewer delays, smoother scheduling, fewer medication mistakes. We added new features based on their notes and launched another version 6 weeks ahead of schedule. Then came the first journal mention, a small write-up in a healthcare IT newsletter. Nothing major, but enough to catch the eye of a regional investor who judged one of our early pitch contests. He reached out asking to meet. We didn't know much about venture capital at that point. We just knew how to solve problems. Still, we took the meeting at a diner just off the interstate and walked away with our first seed check. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to rent proper office space and buy decent equipment. We left the apartment and moved into a tiny corner suite on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse. No windows, creaky floor, and a furnace that clicked louder than it heated, but it was ours. We kept hiring, slowly. First a systems admin, then a part-time nurse consultant. Lena's cousin built out a marketing site, and I handled server security on the weekends. We weren't growing fast, but we were growing steady. And every week more clinics called asking for demos. At home, nothing changed. That spring, Mom invited me to dinner when a cousin from Boston came to visit. I showed up in a button-down and clean slacks. She still greeted me with, "You look like you've been working hard." "Everything all right?" I nodded. Over dinner, my uncle asked Ethan about his surgical rotation, then turned to me and asked, "Still doing computer stuff?" "Yeah," I said, "still building." "Well," he chuckled, "you know, computers always changing. Good luck keeping up with it all." That summer, Medivault signed with a mid-sized hospital system in New York. Their head of operations said, "We've seen the major vendors. None of them actually listen. You two do." By my 26th birthday, we'd raised $5 million in Series A funding. Our team had grown to 30. I'd paid off my student loans, moved into a small but comfortable place near the waterfront, and finally stopped eating frozen dumplings for dinner. And still, when I visited home, I drove my old car. I wore the same clothes I'd worn in college. Simple, neutral, nothing that might open questions. I wasn't hiding, not exactly, but I wasn't ready to explain it either. Sometimes after dinner, I'd pull up our metrics in bed server, uptimes, facility usage rates, client renewals. I'd stare at them like someone checking a compass, making sure I was still pointed in the right direction. It was never about the numbers. It was about knowing I wasn't lost. A few months later, I got an email that changed everything. A hospital network spanning 3 states wanted to bring Medivault into all 27 of their facilities. Their board had reviewed our platform, and the vote was unanimous. I read that message 3 times before calling Lena. She picked up and I just said, "It's them. It's happening." She didn't say anything at first, just sat down. That one contract multiplied our revenue. Phones started ringing. Emails came in from systems we hadn't even contacted. 2 weeks after that, a larger tech company asked to meet. They sat across from us in a sleek glass conference room and offered $30 million to acquire Medivault outright. We said no. It wasn't that we didn't want the money, we just weren't done yet. Another few weeks went by, then came a call from a venture group in Boston. They offered the same amount, $30 million, but this time just for a minority stake. We'd keep control. They'd help us grow. We said yes. When the press release went out, Lena's photo was used. My name appeared next to a silhouette. I asked them to leave my picture out. Just first name only. Olivia, co-founder and CEO. It wasn't secrecy. It was something else. And soon even that choice would be tested. When the article ran in Health Tech Weekly, they called me the Ghost Founder. No photo, just my first name and a shadowed outline me looking out over our office windows toward the city. They didn't press for a quote. They didn't need to. The write-up focused on the company, how Medivault had cut communication errors by 40% at several pilot hospitals, how our renewal rate was over 90%, how users described it as the first software they didn't dread logging into. Lena's headshot ran next to the text. Underneath it listed both our names, hers in full, mine, Claire co-founder and CEO. We framed the article and hung it near the elevator. Some days I'd glance at it on my way out, watching people stop to read it while waiting for the doors to open. "Why don't you want your picture in these things?" Lena asked one afternoon, scrolling through another press inquiry. "You built this." "I know," I said. She didn't push. She never did. What I couldn't explain, not really, was that recognition felt complicated. I didn't want a spotlight that invited questions from people who'd never once asked what I was building, and I wasn't sure I could handle them seeing it now and pretending they always believed in it. At home, my parents still asked if I was keeping busy. I'd nod and say I was. That was enough for them. But the truth was, we were no longer small. Medivault was now used in over 200 medical facilities nationwide. We'd been invited to speak at 2 national health IT conferences. Our analytics dashboard showed user feedback every morning, and almost every day new facilities sent emails asking for demos or integration options. Lena and I met twice a week to review expansion strategy. One Friday, she looked across the table and said, "We need to talk about international." She was right. By the end of the quarter, we had pilots running in 2 Canadian hospital networks, and a healthcare publication out of London had asked to feature us in their spring issue. Still, I drove the same car, wore the same watch, walked the same route to work. I didn't talk about the money, not even when I made the last student loan payment, not when our investor deck listed us as valued over $100 million, and certainly not at home. Family dinners stayed the same. Ethan had finished his surgical residency and taken a job at a hospital not far from where we grew up. Mom made sure everyone knew about the board position he'd just been offered. Dad recited updates like stats, number of patients, number of surgeries, number of speaking engagements. When people turned to me, it was usually with gentle questions. "Still in software, or you thinking about going back to school at some point?" One holiday, Dad pulled me aside in the hallway. "I know you're trying," he said, "but have you considered something more stable? I could ask Ethan if his hospital has a tech position. Something entry-level, but it's a start." I said thank you and changed the subject. Later that evening, I told Lena what had happened. She looked up from her laptop and asked, what would it take for them to finally get it? I didn't know the answer, at least not then. Then came the email from Horizon Health Systems, one of the largest health software companies in the country. Their outreach was polite, professional, and vague. They were interested in discussing potential alignment opportunities. We set up a call. It went well, too well almost. A week later, their development lead flew out to tour our office. 2 weeks after that, we were invited to present at their Chicago headquarters. Lena flew in early to run through the pitch. I stayed behind, joining the meeting via video from my office. My name on the Zoom tile was just Claire Medivault. I listened, answered questions, and signed off before they could dig too deep. Horizon sent a preliminary offer the following week. It was generous, $215 million, with terms that kept Lena and me on as leads for at least 3 years. Our attorneys reviewed the documents. The deal looked real and close. Within days, word started circulating in quiet circles that Medivault was about to become part of Horizon's digital infrastructure. I didn't say anything to my parents. Then Mom called one afternoon while I was reviewing the last quarter's projections. "Your brother has news," she said. "He and Dana set a date Labor Day weekend. We're hosting an engagement dinner at Blue Oak in the city." Blue Oak. Michelin-starred, reservation-only, white tablecloth, everything. "You'll need to block off that weekend," she said. "And Claire, it's a very upscale event. You may want to shop for something more polished." I looked down at my work blazer, tailored silk-lined, bought last year in Soho before a conference keynote. "I'll find something," I said. "Oh, and Dana works at a tech firm. Something in health systems, I think. You'll have something in common. You can talk shop." "What firm?" I asked. "I don't remember. Horizon something. Very impressive. They're flying her to conferences all over the place. I'll send you the name." She didn't need to. I already knew. I opened LinkedIn after we hung up. It didn't take long. Dana Whitmore, Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Horizon Health Systems. She was the one leading our deal. I stared at the screen, trying to connect the version of Dana I saw at Thanksgiving. Friendly, chatty, always smiling with the executive who now had my signature on a term sheet in her inbox. I texted Lena, "You'll never believe who Ethan's fiancée is." She called me 30 seconds later. I told her everything. Then I sat back in my chair and stared at the city skyline. The dinner was 2 weeks away, and I had no idea what was going to happen when our two worlds finally met at the same table. The week before the dinner, my phone rang 3 times from home. The first was Mom asking again if I needed help shopping for something appropriate to wear. The second was Dad leaving a voicemail, "Claire, you'll want to bring something impressive to say about your work. Dana's parents are very accomplished." The third came late on a Thursday. "Claire." Mom began, her tone quiet. "Careful. I need to talk to you about something. Delicate." She said she and Dad had been chatting with Dana's parents and mentioned me. Ethan apparently had told them I was between jobs just to make things easier. Before I could respond, she added, "Your father and I were thinking, Dana's dad knows someone at Apple. Entry-level IT support, but it's a start. Maybe that could get you on the right track." I didn't answer right away. She continued, "We all have to start somewhere. This could be a real opportunity for you, honey." I told her I appreciated the thought, then got off the phone. I sat for a long time afterwards, staring at the contract from Horizon on my desk. $215 million. Final terms agreed, closing in days. I called Rachel that night, my oldest friend, the only one outside of work who knew the full story. "They tried to set you up for a pity interview," she said after I explained. "In the middle of a 9-figure acquisition deal." She let out a short laugh. "Even for them, that's impressive." I didn't respond right away. Rachel waited. Finally, she asked, "So, what are you going to do at this dinner? Show up in a hoodie or wear that blazer that makes boardrooms nervous?" I considered it for a long moment. "I'm just going to be myself," I said. "No announcement, no reveal, no performance." Rachel let that sit for a second. "Then, that's very grown up of you. 5 years of therapy will do that." I didn't feel nervous as the day got closer. Not exactly. I felt settled. The night before the dinner, the final offer from Horizon came in signed, scanned, ready to execute. The deal was public in a matter of days. My name would be on it. Full name this time. I chose a black dress, elegant, understated, the one I wore when we met with our Series A investors. No label visible, just clean lines and a quiet confidence in the fabric. I arrived at Blue Oak right on time, not early enough to help with name cards like Mom suggested, not late enough to make an entrance, just on time. The hostess led me to a private room near the back. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Chicago skyline, where the lights along the river flickered softly in the dusk. Dad was already deep in conversation with a silver-haired man I didn't recognize, probably Dana's father. Mom was adjusting the centerpiece. Ethan spotted me first. "Claire," he said warmly, crossing the room. "Glad you made it. Come meet Dana." She stood near the window in a burgundy dress, hair pinned back, looking every bit the rising executive. "This is my sister Ethan," said his voice easy like always. "Claire." Dana reached out with a smile. "It's so nice to finally meet you. Ethan's told me a lot." I returned the smile. "Congratulations to you both." Mom appeared then, smoothing her skirt. "Claire, you found something to wear." "Good. We've put you next to Cousin Janet. Thought you'd enjoy catching up." I nodded, saying nothing. Dinner began with a round of toasts. Dad spoke first, raising his glass. To Ethan, who's made us proud every step of the way, he said. And to Dana, a brilliant woman, smart, accomplished, and more than a match for him. The room laughed politely. Mom followed with a few stories about Ethan's childhood projects and his recent board appointment. "He's always had focus," she finished, "and now he's found someone who matches his drive." Dana smiled, glancing toward me briefly. There was a pause, just a flicker of curiosity in her expression, like she was trying to place something. The first course arrived. Conversation filled the room. Cousin Janet leaned over. "So, Claire, are you still between roles? I heard your mom mention something about Apple." "I'm in healthcare tech," I said simply. "Oh, that's nice. Is there room for advancement in that field?" I nodded. "Plenty." A few seats down, Uncle Paul chimed in. "Ethan says you might be landing something at Apple. That's a good brand name. Big step up." Before I could answer, Dad cut in. "Claire, there's no shame in needing a little help to get started. Everyone needs a first break." Across the table, Dana looked over at me. "Claire," she said, her voice rising just enough to catch attention. "Forgive me, is your last name Hammond?" The room grew still. Ethan looked confused. "Of course it is. She's my sister." Dana's eyes widened slightly. "Wait. Claire Hammond. From Medivault." I met her gaze but said nothing. She set her fork down. "You're the founder." Ethan laughed. "No, you're thinking of someone else. My sister does support or something." "No," Dana said, her tone quiet but certain. "She's the founder and CEO of Medivault, the platform we've been trying to acquire for months. The one that cut communication errors at St. Francis by half last year. That Medivault." The table went completely silent. Dad lowered his wine glass. Mom looked down at her napkin. I straightened slightly in my chair. "Yes," I said, "that's me." Dana let out a soft laugh. "This is unexpected." She glanced around the table, then back to me. "Your team's been incredible to work with, and your interface, honestly, it's the most intuitive I've seen in 10 years. We've modeled internal prototypes after it more than once." Ethan was staring at me now. "Is this true?" he asked. I nodded. "We started 6 years ago. We serve about 300 hospitals nationwide." Dana looked impressed. "And the deal? It's closing this week." "That's right." Relatives who hadn't spoken to me all evening suddenly turned, leaning in. Questions started from every direction. "When did you start this?" "How many people work for you? Are you hiring? Does your platform use AI?" Mom cleared her throat. "Well, I always said Claire had a special talent with computers." Dad added, "We're very proud." Very proud. Ethan didn't say much the rest of the evening. As the meal ended, Dana pulled me aside quietly. "I didn't mean to out you like that," she said. It was a surprise. A good one." I smiled. It was bound to come out eventually. She nodded. "I hope we get a chance to talk more. Professionally, I mean. There's a lot more we could build together." We said goodnight. As I walked back through the quiet dining room, the lights from the river dancing just outside the windows, I felt calm, not triumphant, not shaken, just steady. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms. The first text came in before I made it home. It was from Mom. "We need to talk. Brunch tomorrow, 11 a.m. at the Drake." By the time I'd changed clothes and brewed a cup of tea, the messages were coming from every direction. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years, old family friends, A few polite notes asking if I might be open to chatting about investment opportunities. Even Ethan had sent 3 separate texts, each more bewildered than the last. The final one just said, "Why didn't you tell me I didn't respond to any of them that night?" The next morning I arrived at the Drake just before 11. Mom and Dad were already seated, both dressed like they were heading to a business meeting instead of brunch. Dad stood when I approached, offering a quick hug that felt unsure of itself. "You look well," he said, sitting back down. Mom gestured to the waiter for coffee, then turned to me. "Claire, we have so much to discuss." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded copy of a tech news article. I recognized the layout. It was the Horizon acquisition announcement. My full name in the headline. A photo of me finally published standing beside Lena in our downtown office. "We've been reading all about MediVault," Mom said. "The funding rounds, the hospital partnerships, the national features. Why would you keep all this from us?" I sipped my coffee. The dining room buzzed around us. Quiet clinks of silverware, a low hum of conversation, the occasional laugh from another table. "I think you know why I said." Dad leaned forward. "We've always supported your pursuits." I set my cup down. "You told me to get a real job 5 years ago. Offered to ask Ethan about administrative work." Mom bristled slightly. "We were concerned. You never gave us specifics about what you were doing, because every time I tried, I said calmly, you acted like it was a phase, something to get through before law school or med school or whatever plan you had for me." "That's not fair," she said quickly. "We only wanted the best for you. What you wanted," I said, "was for me to follow a path you understood." Dad exhaled. "You have to admit it's worked out. Maybe we pushed you, but look at what you've accomplished." There it was. I stirred cream into my coffee without answering. Dad continued, "You're clearly brilliant. We always said that." Mom added, "Your brother always spoke highly of your potential. Even when you were building that website in high school, he said you had a gift." I nodded slowly. "You love me, I know that. But love without respect isn't the same thing. I needed you to see what I was building, not just dismiss it because it didn't come with a white coat or a courtroom." The rest of the meal passed in quiet waves, a few more attempts to explain, to reshape the past. Some apology, some defensiveness, and eventually a soft agreement to meet again for dinner the following week. It wasn't a clean resolution, but it was something. That evening, Ethan showed up at my door holding a bottle of wine. "I figured we might need this," he said. I let him in. He looked around the condo, the high ceilings, the clean lines, the wall of windows overlooking the lake. "Nice place," he said. "Really nice." We sat in the living room. He poured 2 glasses. The silence held for a beat too long. So he began. "I've been an ass." I raised my eyebrows slightly. "I have," he continued. "I liked being the one they were proud of, the one with the plan. I never asked what you were doing. Not really." I didn't interrupt. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm sorry. And I'm impressed. Dana hasn't stopped talking about MediVault since the dinner. Apparently you're some kind of genius." I smiled slightly. "We built something that worked. That helped." Ethan nodded. "Like what I try to do, just on a bigger scale." We talked until the windows turned dark with evening. About work, about growing up, about the way things had felt when we were kids. It was the first time in years we'd spoken without expectation or tension. As he was leaving, he paused in the doorway. "Dana really hopes you two get to know each other better, especially now that you'll be working together." "I'd like that," I said. And I meant it. Over the next few weeks, the acquisition moved toward completion. The formal announcement went out. My inbox filled with press inquiries and congratulations, and my parents began to change slowly. Dad asked to see the MediVault platform. He watched closely as I walked him through the features, nodding in a way I hadn't seen before. Mom admitted she didn't fully understand the tech, but said she was proud of what I'd built. There were awkward moments, too, like when Dad tried to offer advice about hiring practices, or when Mom called during a board meeting to ask if I was remembering to eat. But there were real conversations, too. Dana helped more than I could have imagined. She understood both sides, the business and the family dynamic. She translated when needed softened rough edges and reminded my parents that success didn't always wear a stethoscope. "They're trying," she told me one day over coffee. "They don't have the language for your kind of success, but they're learning." She was right. By the time the acquisition officially closed, Lena and I were listed in the final press release, names, titles, and photos included. For the first time, I didn't ask for anything to be removed. 6 months later, I led Horizon's innovation division from a corner office overlooking the river. Lena was heading international expansion. Our platform had reached facilities on 3 continents, and every Thursday night, Ethan, Dana, and I had dinner together. Sometimes Mom and Dad joined, sometimes not. But the rhythm was there now, easy, growing real. By early fall, my days had shifted into a rhythm I'd never experienced before. Mornings started with development calls to our teams overseas. Afternoons were filled with meetings on integration rollout compliance. MediVault was now in over 400 facilities across 3 continents. We were scheduling our next expansion push. Lena handling Europe, me managing domestic growth. Horizon had given us room to lead without getting in the way. At the same time, something quieter was happening at home. Mom began reading articles about healthcare tech. I caught a copy of Tech Founders Under 35 on the table during one of our Sunday dinners. She'd underlined paragraphs, highlighted industry terms. Dad stopped trying to give me business advice. He started asking questions instead about how MediVault handled interoperability or how we were navigating HIPAA updates across regions. One afternoon, he asked if he could see the software himself. I gave him a walkthrough, simple, clean, just like we designed it. He listened closely, nodding. At the end, he said, "This makes more sense than what we use at the hospital." It wasn't praise exactly, but it landed deeper than anything he'd said before. Family dinners changed too. They weren't stiff or orchestrated. Dana would bring wine. Ethan would attempt a dessert, usually something half-burnt and full of enthusiasm. Sometimes Mom and Dad joined. Other times it was just the 3 of us around the kitchen island, laughing over stories from work or wedding planning. Dana became a bridge not just between me and Horizon, but between the 2 versions of my life I'd kept separate for so long. "You know," she said one night over coffee, "your parents didn't dismiss your work because they thought you'd fail." I looked at her. She went on, "They dismissed it because they didn't understand it. And your dad, he hates not understanding things." It was quiet after that, but the words stayed with me. Ethan changed too. We weren't competing anymore. We were comparing notes about leadership, about burnout, about how hard it was to set boundaries with parents who'd spent decades managing every detail of our lives. One Sunday, he showed me his latest project, an internal platform he was building for surgical tracking. "I think we could integrate some of your back-end logic," he said, "if you're open to it." I was. For the first time, we were working together. Not in parallel, not in contrast, but side by side. There were still rough edges. Mom occasionally asked if I was getting enough sleep. Dad still forwarded me articles I didn't ask for, but the tone had changed. The undercurrent of doubt, of quiet correction, it had eased. The breakthrough came one afternoon in late October. I was hosting a mentoring session at the office, a monthly workshop for high school girls interested in STEM. It was something Lena and I had started quietly after too many years of being the only women in every room we walked into. One of the students, 15, maybe 16, stayed behind after everyone else had gone. "My parents think computer science is a hobby," she said, twisting the strap of her backpack. "They want me to go into law, like them." I asked, "What do you want?" She didn't hesitate. "To build something that matters." I walked her through a few next steps, scholarships, internship programs, small things that helped. As she turned to leave, I added, "Keep the door open for them. Sometimes people come around, even if it takes a while." That night, as I locked up the office, I thought about what justice had really looked like in my life. It wasn't a grand speech or a single turning point. It was moments, tiny adjustments. A parent asking to see your work. A brother calling to talk, not because something was wrong, but because he wanted to hear your voice. A childhood dinner table reimagined years later as a kitchen counter surrounded by new respect. At our next Sunday dinner, Ethan arrived with something other than cupcakes, a chocolate cake fully intact, only slightly lopsided. "I hedged my bets," he said, grinning, "but I only burned one corner." Dana set down the wine. "Big update, we booked the venue." And Mom finally signed off on the guest list. "Miracles do happen," I said. Later, while we passed around slices of cake, Ethan turned to me. "You ever wish it had been different?" he asked. "What do you mean? Like, that they'd supported you from the start? That they saw what you were doing when it was just you and Lena in a garage?" I thought about it. I really let the question hang. Sometimes I said, it would have been easier, less painful. But I don't know if I'd have become the same person or built the same thing. He nodded slowly. "Guess it worked out," he said. I looked around the room at the cake on the counter, at Dana reading something on her phone, at the lights reflected in the kitchen window. It had. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the kitchen, the quiet settling in like a soft blanket. The cake dish was empty except for a few crumbs. A wine glass sat half full by the sink. The kind of mess that didn't feel like a chore, just proof that people had been here and they'd stayed a while. I moved through the apartment, slowly turning off lights, letting the silence stretch. Out on the balcony, the city hummed below, steady and distant. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and stood there for a while, just breathing. It struck me then in a way it hadn't before. The life I'd built wasn't in opposition to anyone. It wasn't a rebellion or a performance. It was mine, quietly, steadily, fully mine. Medivault had started with 2 laptops and a folding table in Lena's spare room. Now it was changing how care was delivered in over a dozen countries. The boardroom doors I used to imagine pressing my ear against, I walked through them every week now, and I spoke without raising my voice. My parents hadn't changed overnight, but they'd shown up. They'd tried, and I could meet them where they were now, instead of where I wished they'd been back then. Ethan and we'd grown past rivalry, past resentment. We were 2 adults finding a new kind of siblinghood, one built not on comparison, but on understanding. And Dana, she was family through and through, steady, sharp, and endlessly kind. The kind of person who sees the version of you that hasn't even bloomed yet and believes in it anyway. If you'd asked me back in that high school computer lab what justice would look like one day, I might have said awards or recognition, maybe even an apology. But now I know better. Justice can be soft. It can sound like your father asking you to explain something twice, not because he doubts you, but because he wants to understand. It can look like your mother slipping a folded newspaper onto your desk, quietly marked with your name. It can taste like burnt cake delivered with a grin. Sometimes the loudest triumph isn't a roar. It's a long-held silence finally breaking into laughter. And sometimes dignity isn't something you fight for. It's something you quietly claim again and again until one day it simply lives in you. Thanks for walking through this story with me. If it stirred something in you, a memory, a moment, a quiet truth, I'd love to know. And if you've ever had to build your own path when no one believed in it, you're not alone. Take care, and I'll see you next time.